In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. All right, well, thank you guys for having me out. So I was told to talk about financial anxiety and trusting God's provision, a spiritual perspective. So I don't know what to say other than, the age you guys are at, the GYP age, usually a stressful time. There's a lot of transition. You're trying to figure out what you want to do. The thing you wanted to do is not what you want to do. The job you thought you had is not the job you have now. The boss you thought you wanted is not the boss you got. Lots of moving parts. And especially, you're in Orange County or wherever you live, right? You're in Southern California and you're realizing, I'll never buy a home, just mathematically speaking, short of some windfall or, someone dying really fast, it's very expensive. You just start adding up all the costs and it's just, there's a lot of anxiety that comes from that. So I guess what we'll talk about is sort of just how we approach this anxiety, right? And I'm trying to be less sarcastic in my talk, so I'm working on it, But what we won't talk about is how to manipulate God in order to make more money, which is a common topic of discussion. If you do this, God will bless you. Blessing is equivalent to money, and or sheep, cows, children. So what we don't want to do is get in the thing of how do I use God to get stuff, right? Because then we very quickly fall into the vending machine God that we're often told about, if you just do these things. Then. All right, so what I want to talk about this is the word anxiety and trust. The donuts? Hey. All right. Hey, guys. We're talking about financial anxiety. Can you guys see the screen? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I want to talk to you. This is a great quote by St. Basil. He says, God takes care of everyone. Do not say this happened by chance, while this came to be of itself, coincidence, and all that exists. There is nothing disorderly, nothing indefinite, nothing without purpose, nothing by chance. How many hairs on your head? Not many on mine. God will not forget one of them. He doesn't have much to remember. Do you see how nothing, even the smallest thing, escapes the gaze of God? Right. So what I like about this quote is it just gives you this feeling of there is a randomness to the world, but there's also God's providence in the world, right? And so at some level, we have to start thinking deeply about this God. What's God's providence? Okay. And I think the part that throws us off oftentimes is that. Is interpreting God's providence as something that's not what I want. I'll work hard and then God will bless me and then I'll get this. Well, that's a great plan that you've made for yourself, that you want, that's your will, that's what you desire. It may not be what God desires, right? And we do say over and over, thy will be done, right? Not my will be done. So what's hard to see sometimes is, we see this disorderly, indefinite, without purpose, chance, and this just is random, and sometimes it's hard to see God's hand in all of these things. So what's the source of stress and fear in the world? Where does it come from? Where did it originally come from? What do you think?
The fall.
Yeah, that's usually the right answer, right? So there are many sources that we have of fear and stress in the world, and we'll get to the fall in a second. Wars, disease, politics, the stock market, children, relationships, okay? So there's lots of things that give us anxiety in the world, right? And in the world, Jesus promised us this, didn't he? What did he say? In the world, you will have tribulation. End of story, right? So Christianity isn't about promising a carefree life or a life full of no stress or a life that goes your way or, that God somehow plows for you and everything is, roses and unicorns. It's not roses and unicorns. It's unicorns and rainbows. It's rainbows and unicorns, right? So that's not the promise of God, right? There's lots of stuff, and this is real stuff, okay? And so we're in this constant state of chaos, right? And we constantly live in the shadow of darkness, right? There's always fear about the future. There's always anxiety about the future. And when fear enters the life of a person, it is the worst enemy and is the worst fight. And it can even become a disease, right? I mean, anxiety is a thing, right? And everyone treats anxiety with what? Drugs, right? Yeah, I mean, tons and tons, right? I mean, there's more anti-anxiety medication in Orange County than like in most other counties in America, right? And there's more money in Orange County than, I remember when we first moved to LA, my wife went to some primary care doctor that someone recommended, and the lady asked her, so what are you on? And she goes, nothing. She goes, you're not on anything? She goes, no. She goes, not antidepressant? No. Not anti-anxiety? No. And it turns out, we started talking to some other doctors, like in Orange County, like, why were we asked all these? It's like, 60% of my patients are on anti-anxiety medication, right? And of women, right? And these are women with, 4 houses, right? And only 2 boats, and very anxious. So once fear gets into you, it's a very tough nut to crack, right? And it can cause all kinds of issues down the road. And one of the things that I always say is fear is from the devil, right? The most repeated commandment in the Bible is do not fear. 365 times. That's what Google says, at least, right? So this is something that God required, like God has told us over and over again, right? So whenever I've experienced fear, I know it's not from Him, right? It's from another place, right? And so every time I think about this anxiety of the world, now not the stress of the world, like I can have a stress of a job, stress of an exam, stress of a whatever, that's fine. Okay, it's that anxiety piece, right? Well, what's going to happen in the future, right? And so one of the things I want to tell you is every time you find yourself in the future and thinking about the future, okay, that's not where God is, right? God is always where? In the present, right? So if you're in the future or the past, that's from the devil. The present is where God is. And every time I find myself thinking about, what could have been, and if only I had done this, if this person had treated me right, if this hadn't happened, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? And you're replaying all the stuff that happened in the past, and you get angry about it. You think about it, you get angry again, over and over and over again. And that same person that pissed you off, you let them piss you off another 100 times. That's Satan just messing with you, right? Because you can't undo that. It's in the past, right? And then the future is full of anxiety because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And I have no idea, and I can't control it. So I stay up all night thinking of every scenario that could happen, right? And I worry about them, and I plan, and what if this happens? And then you know what happens, right? None of those things actually happen, right? All the 100 scenarios you came up with, none of them actually, scenario 101 shows up. So fear isn't from God, right? And every time I find myself in this fearful position, I have to say to myself, what's wrong, right? I should have no fear, okay? And this is what, if you want to learn one thing from the martyrs, learn that, and we got this blessing of the 21 martyrs of Libya, right? Where we got to watch it on video, right? We got to see the Synaxar on video, and see what these stories actually looked like. Fearless, right? In the face of a knife to the throat, which is a pretty fearful event. And the world is just full of people who are just afraid. And there's a very small proportion that has no fear, that has no anxiety, right? And that's why, like in America, the insurance business is such a big business. You can buy how many kinds of insurance, right? And insurance plays on fear. What happens if you die? What happens if you're incapacitated? What happens if you have a disability? What happens if you work with your hands, but now you can't work with your hands? Buy insurance for this, buy insurance for that. Like, I get healthcare insurance. That one makes a lot of sense. But then there's like 30 others, right? And you start looking at all the policy. What if someone falls on your property and breaks their neck? Then, they could sue you. So you should buy insurance for that policy. And everyone's playing on fear, right? And it's a big moneymaker, okay? Fear of aging. big moneymaker, right? And you can tell anybody, I'll turn back you won't get old. Fountain of youth, you can find it. You're a billionaire. So let's go back. Where did this fear come from originally? And the source is very important, right? It's what you said, David. Like, this is from Adam and Eve, right? Because if you remember the story, what happened as soon as they sinned?
They were scared.
They hid from God, right? So the source of fear, sorry. Does anyone know if there's water?
I can be for water.
This isn't water. This is a protein drink. It's just going to make me glunky. Actually, I have water. Oh. Is this from the homeless guy? Okay. You didn't drink from it after the homeless guy kissed you. Okay, just asking. That's not an important story. You don't need to hear the details. Right? So what happens is, right, what we see naturally is once Adam falls, fear enters the world. Right? And lots of things entered the world, right? Death entered the world, corruption entered the world, injustice entered the world, and fear entered the world. It's also a consequence of the fall. Okay? So we need to kind of reverse engineer it a little bit. Right? So if sin is what makes me fearful, then one of the ways to fix fear is to... The donuts are here. How are you guys doing? Oh, come on in. Let's talk about the donuts. So the source of fear and anxiety is sin. So that's the other thing I have to start thinking about. Every time I feel fear, I have to ask myself, is there sin in my life? Is there something broken? Is there something in my spiritual life that's off? Right? So don't think about the thing that's scaring you. Right? But think about why I'm scared. Right? And I'm not talking about like a lion's coming at you and I should be, hey, I'm not scared. No, that's stupid, right? Run. Okay? But I think with a lion, you're supposed to be big. But anyway, the point is, it's not about reacting to, some stimulus that's obviously fearful, okay? But when we get into that deep anxiety, that scared, what if this happens? Ask myself, what's broken in the system, right? And usually this is what's broken in the system, right? There's an initial fall. There's something that happened that created this, right? Then the man and his wife heard the voice of the Lord walking in the garden in the breeze of the day, and they hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. So the Lord God cried out to the man, "Where are you?" And I heard your voice in the garden, he replied, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid myself. Okay? So the source is very important. So, all right. So then where does peace come from? And I'm not talking about like temporary peace, right? I'm not talking about going to the spa, okay, and, putting hot stones on your back and getting a massage, right? No matter what the commercial looks like, it doesn't actually work. Obviously, some would put hot stones on their back from all the smiles and the massages, Okay. But I'm talking like real peace, like, and by the way, there's a whole industry devoted to this, right? Like the whole travel industry, the whole spa industry, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars devoted to trying to find peace, right? Trying to get rid of your anxiety. And everyone promises you, I put cucumbers on your eyes, you're going to wake up a new person, right? And that's what you need to get rid of, the stress. And I'll pull the toxins out of your body using mud, right, that I pulled out of the backyard, whatever, okay? So this isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about real deep peace, like something very deep, right? And there's no place in the world aside from the fountain of peace that gives this peace, right? And you can see this, you see this during COVID, right? COVID, people cracked. People lost their minds, and some people still have lost their minds. They still haven't recovered, and it shook them in a way that scared me, actually. Like, are we really that scared as a society? And I remember hearing a wonderful, sermon by Abuna Loa Cedros, God rest his soul, from Torrance, and he would, he talks about depth with God, and he says, when there's a storm in the world, the only place there's a storm is on the surface. The boats are being battered, and but if you're a fish and you're 200 feet down, you don't even know there's a storm, right? And the deeper you go, the less storm there is. Right? And so when you go down pretty far, right, what storm? Okay, so the storm is only when you're on the surface, when you have a shallow life with God, right? But the deeper you go with God, the less you feel the storms of the world, right? And that's why, you'll see people, and there'll be a terrorist attack or there'll be something, and everyone just freak out, or anything will happen, politics or Trump wins or whatever, right? And people just get really, about certain events, and you're like, where's the depth, right? Who's in control of this world? Why is there so much fear? Why is there so much anxiety? And so really there is no peace that comes from money, wealth, power, prestige. It doesn't work. I'll cut to the punchline now, right? You're going to spend, you're all the GYP stage, right? You're all going to spend the rest of your lives chasing these three things, right? Money, wealth, and power. And in the hopes of, if I have enough money, I will say to myself, like the foolish servant in Luke 10, I will say to myself, self, now I can rest. And God will say, you fool, right? So there is no rest. I can build bigger and bigger barns, and I can build bigger and bigger storages, and I can, I want one more zero on my bank account, and I can check it, and the stocks go up, and then it doesn't work. In fact, the people with more money have more problems. More money, more problems, right? more anxiety. Totally true. Okay, it doesn't solve it like the world promises you it'll solve it. It just doesn't happen. And that's that St. Paul says the Christ is our peace, and so what do we sing? We sing the King of Peace. Grant us your peace. Okay, so this is the only path. This is the only one that's constant. This is the only one that doesn't fade away. So when you say, how do I get over my financial anxiety? And I'm supposed to give you stock tips, and you're like, you're an accounting professor, give us stock tips, or where do I invest, or, 529 plan, or 401k plan, or 357 plan, or whatever number you want. It's not going to give you any safety. You can have as much money as you want in there, and then watch the market drop 2% in a day, and look at people's faces who are really rich, and they're very unhappy, and they're full of anxiety, and they're full of worry, and what if, right? Okay. So where does peace come from? If fear came from sin, then where does peace come from? The King of Peace, right? So how do we, Peter, Adam, and Eve, lose it? What was Peter's sin? I know many of you heard me say this before, but I'll say it again. What did Peter do wrong?
Denying Christ.
Denying
Christ.
In this story, this is him walking on water and sinking. Doubting. Why?
That he wasn't going to be able to walk on water.
Why?
Oh, he lost sight of Christ.
There it is, right? So what he did was, I sound like I'm a Buddhist now. Why? What he did was he took his eyes off Christ. What did he do then? Where did he look?
The water.
The water, the wind, storm, the lightning, the waves, right? What did he look at? The world. He looked at the storms of the world, right? And when you look at the storm of the world, and it's a storm, it's just a constant storm. Just watch CNN, storm, okay? When you watch that storm, and our parents just sit there on, repeat, they're watching Fox though, and they're just on repeat watching the storms, right? Creates anxiety, and you take your eyes off Christ. What does the world do to you? It swallows you up. It consumes you. And that's what happened here, right? And so once you take your eyes off Christ, this is just the natural consequence. Okay? This is the icon that's hanging in my office that I love very much, right? And I just love this look between Peter and Christ, right? And that should be our look. That icon, you should see Peter and you say, that's me, right? The world is swallowing me up, and I just have to look back up at him. And this is one of my favorite psalms, and the reason one of my favorite psalms, it's Pope Kyrillos' favorite psalm. My eyes are ever on the Lord, for only he will release my feet from the snare, right? And every time we think about that, when you get a snare, what's a snare? a trap, right? Imagine you're walking in the forest and a bear trap gets your leg, right? What's the first thing you do? Scream, okay? Second thing you do, you look down at the trap, right? And you figure out, this trap got me like this, trap got me like that. What kind of trap is it? How do I get out? Okay? And what the psalmist is telling us is, you don't look down, you look up. My eyes are ever on the Lord, for only he will release my feet from the snare. So when I get snared by the world and I get trapped and something bad happens, don't look at the trap. Don't try to figure out the trap. Don't think, well, if I tell my boss this, then that other coworker will think that, and bubble, and then you play the world's game. No, you look up, right? Because he will release my feet from the snare. Okay? And this is applicable to financial anxiety, any kind of anxiety, school anxiety, work anxiety, relationship anxiety, name the anxiety. That's me doing a really bad job cutting out an icon on Paint, I think it's called. Okay. These things I've spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Right? In me you have peace. Right? He is the King of peace. Right? We say, the hymn Oboro Faraihe, right? Oboro, when we come in on the feast day. O King of peace, grant us your peace. And then St. Augustine says, where love abounds, fear is displaced. And then St. John, the beloved, says the same thing. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Right? So how do we displace fear? We displace it by love. Right? And we displace it by a love of him and a focus on him. Right? And then all the fear just evaporates. And, forget financial stress or, am I going to be able to retire? Can I buy a nice home? What about the guy who's in jail? What about the guy who's being, attacked for his faith? What about the person who's being persecuted openly, right? These are the real problems. And yet we read these stories and we see these lives of people in extreme situations, whether it be even cancer or persecution or a really bad marriage or really whatever. And their life is, like that fish at 200 feet, just deep, right? Focuses on him. I don't look at the storms, right? Because I have love, right? And when you're in love, everything is great. Elder Porphyrios has this quote. He says, when you're in love, you can be walking in the middle of downtown New York and you have no idea there's cars around you, right? You're just thinking about her like, oh, wow, she's so great, right? You're in La La Land, okay? Even though there's chaos going around you. So the role models, and I'll go through this quickly, right? We all know the histories of the martyrs and the monks, right? That primal instinct of fear just didn't exist, right? So you read these stories of these monks. Anyone here ever been to St. Anthony's Monastery at night? Ever take a walk out at night without a moon? That's a scary thing, right? I remember I was in St. Anthony's in Egypt, and I was going up to the cave, and we were going to do a midnight liturgy. And we were walking up, and there's no light. And I was scared to death, And I was with Abuna AP, and I was scared to death. And every sound, I'm like, there's a sound. And it's like, I can't see there. Like, it's that dark right there. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. And it's amazing, right? And then you think about these monks, and I'm like, it's a pretty safe place, right? You think about these monks in the middle of nowhere. There's no door on their cave. There's nothing. And every night, they dealt with that fear. And, could you live alone like that with fear? These monks were, in pockets there. There was another person a mile away. There was their safety out there in the wilderness. There were so many dangers. Mountains and caves are very dangerous by any measure. Dangerous animals, snakes, scorpions, name it, right? But they didn't have that fear. It's like that instinct was erased from the system. Same thing with the monks, with the martyrs. Just erased from the system, right? How do you get that? And this isn't, am I going to retire in 50 years? Can I buy a 2,000 square foot house? Fear. There's a thing outside my door right now making a sound, and I can't see it. It's a very scary thing, and yet these people had nothing. And when you think about even the way Satan would would tempt a lot of these monks. You read these stories, and Satan would appear to them as like a wolf or something. And you're like, what are you doing? Like, you're just trying to scare the guy? Like, that's what you're trying to do? You're trying to scare him? Like, boo? But that's what Satan was trying to do. He's just trying to scare them. Because once they're scared, their eyes are off of Christ. They're actually very fixated on themselves. They're very me-focused. And now you're in the storm. Now your eyes are on the storm. So there was no fear because Christ drives out the fear. And so fear comes when we lose our connection with our Father. Right? I like this little quote. He says, your prayer rope is your telephone. When you're in need, make a call with it. It's beautiful. Right? So, when the going gets tough, call Dad. Make a call. What can solve the problem of fear in man? The most important thing is for man to love Christ. All other problems will be arranged, right? So again, this is what Christ said. In me, I cast out the fear. In him, right? So what can solve the problem of fear in man? And I want you to think about and I know I use these examples a lot, but I even think of this, say I'm sitting next to my son, right? And he's 6 years old, and we're sitting on a park bench, okay? And an 8-year-old walks up, and my son's like, Dad, that kid's a bully. He's gonna beat me up. I'm like, well, I'm with you. I'm sitting right here. And he's like, no, he's gonna beat me up right now. He's gonna walk over and beat me up. I'm like, he's 8. You know how much I bench, right? Like, you think I'm gonna let him hurt you? He's like, you don't understand, Dad. He's really strong. I mean, he's 8 years old. I can blow and knock him over, right? But to the 6-year-old, that 8-year-old is... And then at some point, I got to turn to my son and say, what? Do you really think I'm going to let an 8-year-old beat you up? Like, don't you have any trust in me? Like, what does that say about me, right? Now you're insulting me. Because I'm sitting right here, what am I, dope? Like, I'm just going to let this kid... So when we have excessive fear, at some level, we're actually insulting God. We're actually saying, you can't handle this 6-year-old, this 8-year-old. He's tough. This is above your pay grade. And so the more fear I have, the more I'm really saying, I don't have faith. I don't really trust you. I don't think you can handle this situation. I got to handle it. Right? And we see this with parents, especially with parents, right? Because when one parent has trouble with their kids, right, you always get really good advice from other parents. Other parents will be like, oh no, just trust God. Let God take care of it. It's going to be fine. All the parents are really good with the spiritual advice until it's what? Their kid. Right? Say, oh, no. You cut the crap. This is my kid now. I'm going to handle this. I'm going to take care of this. I'm going down to the principal's office. I'm going to deal with this. I'm not going to pray that the bully goes away. No, I'm going to make the bully go away. Right? So where's the trust? Where's the faith? It goes out the window, right? When it actually matters, right? I can give a sermon when it's someone else's kid. When it's my kid, So what's your biggest fear? What's our biggest fear? Right? So we have lots of fears, right? We talked about money, talked about anxiety, talked about retirement, we talked about relationships, we talked about getting sick, we talked about having bad kids and good kids and our parents, and there's all kinds of fears out there in the world, right? But if you think about bigger, what's a bigger fear than getting sick? What's a bigger fear of not having money? What's a bigger fear of dropping out of school? What's the biggest fear you have?
Not going to heaven.
Oh, come on, don't give me a Sunday school answer.
Loss.
What kind of loss?
Familiar loss.
Bigger.
Heavenly loss.
Bigger. And that's the Sunday school answer. On earth. Death. Right? That's your biggest fear. Your biggest problem is you're going to die. Like, forget all your other problems. You have an imminent problem. Right? That's our biggest problem. Isn't it? Or is it? These guys weren't afraid. These guys stared death in the face. And when you read the story of how this happened, that they They took these guys out several times. You heard this? You know, like they did rehearsals and they made them think they were going to kill them that day, had cameras, the whole 9 yards, put the knives through their throats, and then didn't kill them. But let them feel what a blade feels like against your throat. And then they said, we'll do this again tomorrow. And they just kept doing it, hoping one of them would break on video. And they just never did. So these guys had no fear. They weren't afraid of death, right? That's the fight or flight response. That's the thing that we're all hardwired to react to, right? Biologically, they didn't have that. So Christ took on the greatest fear we have, the greatest problem we have, which is death. And then if we unite with him, then there is nothing to fear. I mean, didn't Christ say this, right? Do not fear those who can harm the body, but then after that can do nothing to you. So Christ's presence drives out this fear when I'm, as he said, in him. So you should know that if you have fear, you've lost your faith in that moment. Now, I'm not talking about, a car almost hits me and my heart's beating. I mean, that's understandable. I'm talking about that deeper anxiety, thinking type of fear, right? Okay. Faith is against fear. Why? Because the person feels that Christ is holding him and carrying him. Overshadow me with the shadow of your wings. I mean, I just love this psalm. Overshadow me with the shadow of your wings. Just think of the image, right? If you look at the Ark of Covenant, they used to have two cherubs on it, and the two cherubs, their wings went like this, right? And you can imagine being underneath those wings, right? It's such a powerful image. Okay. So Christ took this on, and he trampled death by death, right? So he took on this biggest fear that we have. And so then we have to realize if death can't scare us, then, did I get a C in biochem, and am I going to get into meta, we have to, rank our things. Okay, so what's the ultimate solution to fear? It turns out it's repentance, right? Because if we go back to the story, if sin is what created fear in Adam, then the fix to fear is getting rid of the sin, right? It's taking the sin and doing what? What is sin again? What do we call it?
Absence of God.
Yeah. Sin is death, right? I mean, the wage of sin is death, okay? And so what we do when we repent is we take the death, and what do? We throw it on Christ, all right? And we say, I don't want this to kill me. I want it to kill that guy. Kill him instead. And this is the deal. And Christ says, I'll take that. Don't let the sin kill you. Let it kill me. So as sin enters the world, it's fear and darkness and anxiety and all of these things. And that's why the life of repentance brings me back to God. It brings me back to the love of God. It brings me back to the peace of God. It puts me back in him. And then all the things just kind of go away. And you're like, nothing can hurt me. Nothing can touch me. Even if you take my life, when I get to that point, that won't even affect me, right? Okay. And this is why in iconography, by the way, especially in Coptic iconography, we never depict a face of a martyr in pain, right? If you notice, there's no, sometimes you'll see these, Western pictures of Jesus on the cross. He's like, and his face is all contorted and his body's contorted, his fingers are doing this. And, the artist is really just trying to show gruesome pain, right? But an icon never depicts Christ like that. His eyes are closed, his head is tilted, but there isn't that anguish. A martyr, even as, if you look at the icon of Stephen being stoned, look at the icon of Stephen being stoned, what's he doing? He's looking at Christ. He's basically, this picture, right? He's looking up. And look at their faces. There's no anguish. There's no fear. There's no horror, right? Their faces are calm. And that's the way the icon depicts them, right? So we always have this in our iconography, okay? And so you can see it so this is, which saint is this? Who knows? Saint Ignatius, right? He was consumed by the lions in the Colosseum. You can see his face. He's like, yeah, there's 2 lions on me. All right. And this is Saint Stephen being stoned. He's looking up. Saint Damiana, right? You can just see the calmness in their faces. Okay. So sometimes we just need a little perspective. Saint Paisios says, have you ever seen a shroud with pockets? I know that's kind of morbid, right? So you can't take it with a shroud, like, the shroud that you get buried in.
Oh.
They put you in a shroud, right?
Oh.
So, you can't take it with you, right? No shroud with pockets. I guess if you get buried in a tunya, some tunyas have pockets. Okay, whatever, right? Only good deeds go to heaven, right? So sometimes, as we're in our GYP stage of life where we want to accumulate and we want to build and we want to do all this stuff and make all this money and all this, possess all these assets, just realize you don't take it with you. It's all dust, right? It's all, right? And at the end of every Catholic epistle, what do we always say? The world shall pass away. The world shall pass away and everything in it, right? So sometimes it's just a little bit of perspective. And this is how it all ends anyway, just to be morbid. St. John Chrysostom says, if you knew how quickly people would forget about you after your death, you will not seek in your life to please anyone but God. Right? And so we'll live our whole life, the reputation, innes hayulu alena, what are people going to say? What's our legacy? What's my blah, blah, blah? You don't have a legacy. You're dead and it's a few years. It's a few weeks. I was reading something about, after someone passes away, how long it takes everyone around you to just kind of start going back to normal, right? And, we just saw this at St. Paul's. And people are starting to go back to normal. It's been a week. The family's going to take longer, but everyone else is just like, okay, we move on. And then St. Ephraim has this quote that, just always gets me. If you give all your life to the earth will give you a tomb. But if you give your life to heaven, heaven will give you a throne. And, that first part just strikes, just hits. That's what you guys say, right? It just hits. If you give all your life to the earth will give you a tomb. And you just see so many people give their whole lives to a job, to a company, to a spouse, to a whatever, to their kids. And then what? For what? So sometimes it's just a little bit of perspective, right? I know you guys may have heard me talk about this app. You ever heard this app, WeCroak?
Oh, yeah.
It reminds you 5 times a day you're going to die. Yeah.
Oh.
It's so cool. I can show you. I get notifications all the time. Right? So 5 times a day, it reminds you. I'll show you. It says, you got to go. Oh, shoot. It's not because it's recording. It says, it shows up. It says, don't forget, you're going to die. It's called WeCroak. You should download it. It's pretty cool. And then you tap it, and then it gives you a quote on death. It's like, they're not all spiritual, religious quotes. They're just like quotes of people like, famous people have said stuff about death. But, it seems like a very morbid thought, right? But if you think about the Egbeya, what do we talk about in the 12th hour of the Egbeya every night? The sleep of death, how I lay down, right? So every night the Egbeya reminds you before you go to bed that this is a mini death. Every night the Egbeya reminds you you're going to die, right? And just to give you that perspective, right? And so they've got an app for that now, right? It's 5 times a day. Okay. So then let's talk about the fear of God. So then the question is there anything I should fear? And I did say, if a bobcat's coming at you or a tiger, I would be afraid too, right? So that's okay. There's healthy fear. Cars coming at you, run, okay? But let's talk about the fear of God, because sometimes they'll say, well, I should fear God. Should I fear God? And we use that language all the time. So three things keep men from giving themselves over to sin: faith, hope, and love. So this is a wonderful sermon by St. John Cassian in the 11th conference. So St. John Cassian is he's European, but he went down to Egypt and Ethiopia and Libya, and he interviewed a lot of the monks that lived there in the 4th century. And he wrote these things called conferences, which are just basically dialogues with monks. They're long sermons that he had with these monks. Yeah, and you should read his stuff. It's really good because he writes like a Western guy, but he's interviewing, Egyptian monks at the time. And he says, he talks about this one sermon. He says, there's this verse, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And he says that faith, hope, and love are three levels of a relationship, right? So faith is the first. He says this is the fear of either hell or earthly laws, right? So now I'm afraid because there's a fear of punishment, right? And so these are people who why do I do good in my life? Well, because I don't want to go to hell, right? Why do I avoid sin? Because I don't want to go to hell. Why do I fast? So that God doesn't punish me, you hear people say things like this all the time, right? This one person, she told me her aunt broke her leg. And she goes, I know why I broke my leg. And she's like, because you tripped on the corner? No, because I missed the fast last week. So God punished me because I missed the fast, right? Yeah, cuckoo land, right? So this is a kind of God that I've never read about in the Gospels, okay? But, he exists in the Quran. And that's where she lives, so that's where she got it from, right? So this is the fear of hell. This is the fear of punishment. This is, if I don't do the right thing, God's going to punish me, okay? I got sick. That's because I missed church, right? Or I got sick because I did a bad thing, right? And then the next level is hope, right? So the first one, the fear one, we call like the level of a slave, right? So the slave serves his master because if he doesn't serve his master, he gets whipped. Okay, it's beaten. Okay, there's punishment. The next one is hope. And hope is the desire of the kingdom of God. Right? So why do I do good? Because I want to go to heaven. Why do I do good, things in my life? So God blesses me and gives me medical school and gives me children and gives me money. Right? So I do good because I want to get good things from God. Right? And this is more of what we call like a mercenary model. Right? I will do something good, but you're going to pay me for it, right? I'm going to work at Chick-fil-A for 2 weeks, and you're going to give me a paycheck, okay? And then the last level is the level of love, right? Which is, this is the attraction to good itself and the love of virtue itself, right? So this is, I serve God not because I'm afraid of him, not because he's going to give me good stuff, but rather because I love, and he loves me. And I love him because he loved me first. Right? And I felt his love, right? This is the book Wounded by Love, right? So, this is one of the Proverbs, right? Wounded by love. What does that mean? To be wounded, You're so affected by the love that you just can't help but reciprocate it, okay? And this is hopefully the love that we evolve to as Christians, right? And if you think of a kid goes through all three levels of this, right? When you're a little kid, you're afraid of getting punished, right? Especially in our, culture, right? Hit with the shib, hit with the hazam, right? Whatever the case may be, right? If you do bad things, you're going to get spanked. You're going to get, some kind of corporal punishment, okay? So I'm scared of my dad or mom. That's why I obey them, because they're going to hit me. And then later, they don't hit you, right? But then they say, if you do something good, I'll give you a new phone. I'll give you allowance. I'll give you a car. I'll give you whatever, right? I'll reward you for doing something good, right? Because you're a teenager. And then when you're an old man like me, right? Now you serve your dad or mom, not because you're afraid of them. I'm not afraid of my dad anymore. I'm not worried about him giving me any money, right? I serve him because I love him, right? And now it's evolved into a love relationship, right? So, okay, so this is what we talked about. And so he says, faith, hope, and love, but they differ from one another in the degree of excellence. The first two are appropriate to men who seek perfection, but who are not yet moved by zeal for the virtues. The third is particularly characteristic of God and of those who have taken the image of and likeness of God unto themselves, this love. For only God does good, not out of fear, nor in hopes of a reward, but simply out of love of goodness. Okay, so blessed are those who fear the Lord, serve the Lord in fear. We have to be careful not to confuse this with the kind of fear we see in Islam or Arab culture, right? Where I'm scared of God. So whenever we say fear of God, it's not like if I do this, he's going to punish me, right? That's a punitive type approach. So then, what is this fear of punishment versus fear of love, right? What is the fear of love? And what is that fear and where does it come from? And so again, St. John Cassian answers this question. He says, the fear of love, and this is what we're talking about in the Psalms that we just talked about, is not a terror in the face of punishment, nor a desire for a reward. Rather, it is something which comes from the very greatness of love. It is a mixture of respect and affection which his son has for a very indulgent father. Right? So when we talked about the fear of love, the fear of God, it's the kind of fear we have, he says here, a mixture of respect and affection which his son has for a very indulgent father. Right? So the fear becomes, I don't want to upset my dad. I have a reverence for my dad. I love my dad. I wouldn't want to bother him like that, right? I have an awe for him. Not I'm scared of him, but I respect him. Does that make sense? Right? So we shouldn't let the word fear of God like, hey, you should be scared of God. That's not what we're talking about. And this is what St. John says, there is no fear in love. Rather, perfect love casts out fear, for it is a fear that has an expectation of a punishment. Anyone who's fearful is not yet perfect in love. Right? So it's not about a fear of punishment. That's not what drives us. Right? And I encourage you, as you guys get older and have kids and stuff, don't use that approach with your kids. Don't try to get them to come to church. Say, if you don't go, God's not going to bless you. God's not going to love you. Then it's conditional love, right? It works. Kids get scared and they go to church, but it doesn't last, right? Or they just turn on God and they turn on the church completely and when they're older. Okay, I will skip that one. This is the selfless plug, huh? Merch mode, right? Be the change you want to see in the world. Okay. All right. So do you have any questions on any of this stuff? Yes?
A question. Back to when you're talking about peace, and we're describing like deep in the ocean, you can't really tell there's a storm going on. How would you, I don't know if differentiates the word, but peace versus apathy and not caring, just genuine nonchalance.
So, sorry, donut. I think the difference is a Christian is never apathetic to another human being. I should feel what other people feel. St. Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. So if I have apathy towards a person, whatever their plight is, something's wrong, right? That's not what I'm talking about, ever, okay? Now, can I be somewhat apathetic to what's happening, in some other place, politically? Maybe, right? Something that's happening in, in my corporation, and there's, fighting between the CEO and the CFO, and, there's policy, and maybe. So I think there can be an apathy to the world, but an apathy to my fellow human being, something's broken, right? So the more I'm connected to God, the more I'll be connected to everybody. So I will never have apathy towards anyone's plight. I'll hear everyone's story and I'll feel it like it's my own. There's when he talks about Lazarus. And he says that Christ, groaned in the spirit. And, before, when he found out about Lazarus' death and before he visited him. And he was saying, what is that groaning in the spirit? And he's basically saying that he took his death. He took it and it hit him. And that's why he groaned. It's at that moment that Lazarus regained consciousness, right? So this is what we're called to do as Christians, right? I'm supposed to take your cross, your pain, whatever you have, right? Laughing during that part, it's like a touching part come in. It's like beautiful. Anyway, so I don't think there ever should be that kind of apathy. Sorry, the moment's gone, they left. I would say, but what's happening in the world, what's happening, is this, politically, there's a lot of noise, a lot of turmoil, a lot of, this happens, that happens, and part of me is kind of like, yeah, things reverse a lot. Am I going to get all wound up about it? Not so much. Should I vote my conscience? Absolutely. Should I get involved? Sure. Right? Do I get anxious about it? No. In the world, you will have tribulation, right? There'll be wars and rumors of wars. A lot of that stuff just happens. Yep. Yes?
If there's two friends, one anxious person, one convinced, what do you think will make the other person the same? Like, it's a very superficial question, but like a fish on the top of the surface, a fish in the depth, who pulls who where?
I don't know. But this donut's really good. The question is, if someone's anxious and someone's not anxious, who pull who? I don't know. Whoever's stronger.
Yeah. What if you're surrounded with anxiety?
Huh?
What if you're surrounded with anxiety, like family, friends, everyone around you?
Yeah, find new friends.
I know people are like that.
I'm not a big fan of talking like this, but I think at some level, you have to manage your own mental well-being, right? Like, I find myself naturally, when people are just always negative and anxious and blah, 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 I just tend to not go there a lot. Or I don't engage. I just kind of let it fly. Because, otherwise, it's very hard to convince people not to be anxious. Right? If it's a close friend, you may want to talk about it and just kind of say, you know what, that doesn't really bother me. How could it not bother you, man? Because if, this happens and this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, then, this could happen, right? You're like, I'll wait, And so sometimes I think you can be, the light of the world, right? Salt of the earth, right? Light and salt. That's Christ. So I think we have a responsibility to be Christ in the world. And so I think we need to show that, in the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world, and you have overcome the world in me. And so I think we do have that responsibility to say, you know what, this isn't bothering me, right? And I may be naive here, but I think it's going to all be okay in the end, And then if you got to sing, he's got the whole world in his hands. Sing it, There's a reason it's a very popular song. Did you pee? Just checking. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Can you go to the psalm of overshadowing your wing?
Which psalm?
Overshadow your wing, like under the shadow of your wing.
That's from Ainahti.
Yeah.
Just geeking out on hymns, No, now it's stuck in my head. Where is it? I passed it? What do you think? Oh, there it is.
Oh,
It's the third one.
okay. Yeah, because, I don't know which church father said this, but the shadow of your wings is a reference to the cross.
Mm.
And so we hope, overshadowing.
Oh, I like that.
It sounds like it's your hope is in the cross. Like death is beaten, so there's nothing really to worry about.
Yeah, that all fits. That's good. Any other questions, comments, criticisms, complaints, conundrums, qualms? Any other issues you guys are dealing with that I didn't talk about? Like all the issues you're dealing with. Nothing? Just want donuts? Just watching me eat donuts? Okay. Glory be to God forever.